Thank you, thank you, thank you. First thing I want to say is that I'm super glad to be here, especially in New York. I'm born and raised in New York, so shout out to Gina for organizing this and also letting me speak. So, let's get into it. So, a little bit about myself. The first question you might have is like, how do you say my name? But I make it easy for everyone. So, my name is Adekunle Oduye. You can follow me on the internet. It's just my first name, last name, whatever. And kind of what Nathan kind of said, I am a design technologist at Memorial Sloan Kettering. It's a cancer hospital in New York City. And I'm basically building design systems and also front-end prototypes for the data products over there. So I'm going to start with a disclaimer. My initial talk idea was going to be around how can a design system save lives? And I was going to talk about how I'm crafting this world-class, first, only design system that it's kind of helping doctors to save lives. But there's two things. First, that wouldn't be helpful for y'all, and I'm just going to be up here talking about myself and patting myself on the back, which might not be helpful. But also, I've only been there for 7 months, so I'm not that good. I wish, but I'm not. So, could it save lives? Not really, but I feel like anything's possible. So, not yet. Okay, so the three Ps, the formula came from this reality show I used to watch, or I still watch, but I tell people I don't watch it. Came from The Prophet, and a summary about like kind of like the show is basically the host goes around seeing struggling businesses and basically uses the formula of the three Ps to kind of take them from like not making any profit to making them to like where they are actually profitable. And I was kind of saying like, this could be great for a design system talk. So here I am. The first P is the people. The people are the foundation of whatever we do. We get paid the big bucks to kind of solve problems, but also craft products that are useful. And if you kind of take a deeper dive into the people, there's two groups. You have producers and we have consumers. Basically, producers provide the product, and consumers consume the product. If we take it deeper into like who are the producers, in context of like the actual design system, we have a design system which serves the direct users, and then the direct users serve the end users. And if we take a look into like who are the direct users, this is just a subgroup like of like who uses design systems overall. So we have design, we have engineer, we might have a data science team that uses a design system, we have QA, marketing, and many, many more. But I was kind of thinking that how can we do in a way where we can't really solve problems for everybody. So I had this notion where you design for the primary, you support the secondary, and you accommodate the rest. Because my idea was that you can't really, especially if you don't have a dedicated team, it's very hard to kind of solve everyone's problem. So the best way to kind of do that is to kind of put them into subgroups. And this is an example that I got from Nathan Curtis' article around like how to kind of categorize them. And I kind of did something like this. So we have the primary, which is usually the engineers and designers. You have the secondary, which is QA, data science, marketing. And you have others, which is kind of like customer success, sales, and finance. Your list might be different from mine, but the whole idea is you want to put them in groups. And essentially what you want to do is like the primary users are the ones that are kind of consuming the design system on a daily basis. The secondary users are more using it as a reference. So they're not really like using the actual components and whatnot, but they kind of do it in a way where they're referencing the design system so often. And for others, they don't really use it at all. They know there's a design system out there, but they, day to day, they care less about it. So I talked about like two primaries. We have the engineers and we have the designers. But which experience is most important? Designers or engineers? Before, I used to say whereas like design experience is kind of most important because obviously it's called a design system, so it should be tailored for them. But slowly but surely, I kind of started to think like, I think the developer experience is much more important because developers actually like working within constraints, whereas designers sometimes don't. And the reason why I think this is because front-end engineers or developers execute the actual UI, they execute the actual interaction design of it, and they're in charge of performance and accessibility. So if you really think about it, like if you're a designer, you're more on lines of like planning the actual experience, whereas the engineers are actually crafting the experience itself. And I had this kind of idea where the design system doesn't really exist until it's in code, because we can create the most beautiful sketch library for those that are kind of old school like me, fireworks or anything like that. But at the end of the day, is like if you can't really take that and put it into the actual product, then it doesn't really exist. And the best way to kind of learn what, like, how and what to actually build, you want to do some sort of research. And I think there's two ways to kind of do it. So you have quantitative research, because there's a million ways to actually craft a design system, especially if you think about like, hey, I want to craft a more developer experience for my design system. There might be a way where it's like, oh, what framework should I use? What should I focus on? And the great way to do that is with quantitative research. So this is an example of like a survey I did a couple years back, and I was working at a larger corporation, and the thing we wanted to do is like figure out what to actually focus on. So we knew that there was a need for a design system, but we wanted to really focus on what we should kind of build right now. So we sent out a couple of surveys to engineering managers to kind of get their good sense of it, and they kind of sent some good replies and some stuff that was not shocking, but there was some stuff that was shocking. Another method we could kind of do is qualitative research. This is the one I kind of enjoy better, because like what happens is that you kind of do in a way where you're actually talking to the people individually and kind of figuring out what their needs are. And I like to do this in like one-to-one rather than groups, because you don't want people's opinions to be able to influence each other. So some of the questions I ask is kind of like, what is the major pain points of the design system or design process? And I think it's super important that the design system is kind of solving problems where within the design process, especially for the engineer experience, because you might not always have a designer to kind of like help with the actual UI. So you want them to be kind of like kind of have some sort of like tools that will allow them to kind of craft some UI. Another thing is like, how can you make a design system make your job easier for that? So I kind of tailored this to more of the people that are on the secondary category. So for QA and people that are using it as more as a reference, I think it's important that if you want to be able to have a design system that's going to last and it's going to be productive and it's going to bring value to the team, to really kind of support the secondary user group. And then also, one question I like to ask is like, what are your future goals? Because I think what happens is that we always design it for the now, but I think there's cool stuff, especially within design systems, where people are doing stuff with AI and voice, and you want to be able to way where you're kind of thinking about like, what are the stuff that you could work in the future? So some of the stuff I've learned from doing this research is that people really like documentation, but people don't like writing it. I don't like writing it. I think most of y'all don't like writing it. And I think, but the whole idea is that you might have the best design system in the world, but if you don't have a documentation that tells you how to use it, then it's simply a failure, basically. Yeah. The next thing is that it has to have a seamless integration to any application. So we often talk about how that we like React and Vue and all these frameworks, but there's in most cases where if a application doesn't really want to use any of the newer stuff, can they just put it in like with just CSS, or maybe if there's Sass? So you have to make it in a way where it's like kind of frictionless for the end user. Next thing is that you want to be able to communicate the design system updates. So basically, this happened to me, and I've been the person that been the culprit where I update a component and I just start using it and I don't tell anyone. And then people was like, where does this component come from? And I was like, yeah, this is something I built like a month ago and 2 months ago, and people are unaware of it. So it's you really want to communicate this, and there's multiple ways you can communicate this. There's Slackbot plugins. There is also old-fashioned where you could just kind of email a weekly or bi-weekly newsletter about like what are the updates, but you want to do it in a way where you kind of do it on a consistent basis. And this is a big thing. So I actually worked on a design system that had like 100 components. Mind you, not everything should be a component, but we didn't really test it out, like kind of break or stress test the actual component itself. And what ended up happening is that people didn't want to use it anymore because it wasn't reliable, it wasn't trustworthy, and you want to do it in a way where you kind of do all of that up front. So you want to test it and you validate and making sure that it does what it's supposed to do. So this is a great quote and from the article, The People Part of the Design System. So basically she says, like, we realize that ultimately for our system to succeed long term, it needs to be thought as everyone's responsibility. And I think the only way you can kind of put it in a way where it's like everyone's responsibility if you really truly understand what people need and what people want, but also give them the ability to kind of make that change itself. So this is actually a quote that I'm not going to name the person because they might get embarrassed. But one of my coworkers said that I want to be at a point where front end doesn't have to write CSS to create new UI. And if you really think about it, because a lot of front end engineers I have found out that they don't really like writing CSS. And they actually hate it, so that's why there's a lot of the whole idea of like CSS and JavaScript and whatnot. But you want to be in a way where if you want to use like the newer technologies around like CSS grids or CSS variables to make that as seamless as possible, so they don't actually have to like really take the time to actually learn it. They could just use it right away with little friction as possible. So let's get into the second P, and that is the process. So once you really understand who the people are, and then also understand what their needs and wants, you want to focus on the process. And the good thing about the process is that you want to kind of make sure it does three things. You want to make sure it's predictable. So if I want to get from point A to B, I know the specific steps to get there. You want to make sure it's flexible. So you don't want to make it sure where it's like super structured that it's like kind of brittle. You want to make sure that if there's a problem or something you want to improve, you can kind of improve it on the fly and try it out. And also, you want to make it frictionless. So basically, you want to be in a place where you could actually just take the actual component or whatever your design system and make it in a way where you use it, but also it's effortless, basically. So the first thing you start is with the component audit. We all know how to do a component audit, but basically, this is a kind of like an example of it. And the most important thing about this is that from your findings that you found out, the findings from the research campaign, in addition to doing a component audit, you can really figure out what you should be focusing on. And that leads into the next thing, which is a project roadmap. So this is an example of like a project, like my current project roadmap for the design system I'm building. And the whole idea is that you want to make sure where everything's clear and concise, but also label them. So there's a couple of labels that's around like design needs, engineer needs, bugs, whatever like that. And I did it this way because I'm the only one working on it right now, but in the future there might be a front engineer that might have some time. So they can literally just go in here. It's like, all right, this is something that we need to do. They could grab it, they could start working on it, and also kind of build it out. And the key with this is that you need a person to kind of keep this updated, because if you don't, people are just going to start building random things, and you don't want that. So guidelines. I said guidelines. I don't like saying rules because I feel like in some cases things want to be flexible. So there's some guidelines around how you do your commit message. So kind of what I do is like I literally have brackets, and then I do in the case where it's the actual thing I'm working on. So it could be a badge, banner, core, whatever like that, and just kind of a simple summary. And with this, it makes it easy to kind of search, but also do in a way where if anyone has to kind of read the actual commit history, it's readable basically. And it's similar to also doing issues. I found the same kind of framework. Like I said, it makes it easier for people to read, also it's searchable and whatnot. So let's get into like the code side of things. So I kind of follow the order where like a lot of my decorations and values within CSS is kind of it's about alphabet order. So if you look at this, you can see like it's in order. I say this is a guideline because I don't want people to kind of think about how to do this. It's just for me. I'm just like weird like that. So, but then you look at like the actual values. So you can see right here that in most cases, if I'm gonna be kind of referring to constantly, I usually create like some sort of SAS map or I use a variable to kind of be able to kind of put these in place, so it makes it easy to kind of reference them. The one thing I want to mention is that the process is going to be rough, especially at the beginning. Like things are going to break. There's going to be a lot of technical debt. But the whole idea is that you want to start in small little steps. And I kind of have this philosophy. This is not only for life, but also it's not only for design system, but also for life, where it's like small steps to great distances. So you want to start like get better each day and every day. And what's going to happen is that you're going to be at a point where the process is going to be seamless, it's going to work as usual and whatnot. So Learner. Learner is actually a way where you can kind of manage multiple JavaScript packages within one repo. And the great thing about it is that you actually could be able to independently version your components, which makes it super useful. So this is kind of like a diagram. Let's say we have like our design system repo. We have button, badge, drop-down, icon, banner. And essentially is like what's going to happen is like, if I make an update to the button component, I don't actually have to push all the components up. Like I could just update the button component, push it to npm, and then basically if anyone wants to use the newer styles, all they have to do is literally do like a yarn add or whatever like that to actually get the updates. And this is kind of how it looks in the command line. Basically what's happening is like I'm running a command, so it's like yarn run publish. This is actually is running two commands, a build, but also a publish, learner publish. And basically it's doing all this stuff, and usually at the end it asks you like, this is the current version, and like, what do you want the new version to be? And I think with this, I use the SEM versioning format where we have major, minor, and patch. And that's pretty much it. And the great thing about it is that you can have basically a library of like all the components you could do. So basically, there might be a case where you didn't want to push an actual component. The best thing to do is basically go in here. This is Nexus, and you could kind of delete it and basically update it. But the whole idea is that everything's cataloged, there's a history of it, and basically it makes it super easy to kind of manage all this stuff. So let's talk about the component structure. So I talked about the idea of that each of the actual components are kind of individual packages. So every component has a similar structure. So if you look here, we have an example where we have a design system, repo, and then we have the packages, and then we have the badge. So there's a lot going on, but I'm gonna kind of explain a couple of them. So the .tsx is basically the TypeScript version of JavaScript. TypeScript is just a superset of JavaScript, if anyone's wondering. And then we have like the badge CSS, so basically it's all the styles for the actual component. The .mdx is basically where we put our documentation. So if people want to know like how to use it, everything's all in one place basically. So if you look at the actual component itself, you can see that this is like a very simple component. So basically what we have is like we have the static display name. So basically it just displays what the actual component, the component name when you're looking at it in the actual dev tools. And the one thing I want people to focus on is that what I'm doing is that I'm basically using this kind of like atomic/BEM syntax where I'm combining class names to kind of come up with variants, basically. And if you look at it again, I can show you it again with the badge. So this is kind of like the foundation of the component. So kind of this is out like the spacing, the padding, or whatnot. And then for the variants, what you basically do is like literally think about it where you're like, all right, I have a caution, I have a info, and then I have a mix, and basically it's telling you like what the font color should be and also what the background color should be. And the good thing about this is that you can actually build in theming. So as you can see on the top, we have theme dark. So basically, if there's like any parent class that has theme dark, it's gonna kind of use these styles. And if you want to see it like in real time, this is how it looks. Again, this is like a way where you can kind of keep the actual styles contained to the actual component, which is pretty good. And if you look at the actual dev tool, this is like the React dev tool. You can see that usually you just have like basically the component, but also the props itself. And then if you want to take a look at the HTML version of it, you can see that you kind of see the badge and then the actual variant of it. And the good thing about this is that it literally makes it easy for people to kind of debug in the browser, which is pretty good. And then you get to a point where your design system is actually serving many different purposes. So we have the React version, which is mostly tailored for the engineers. So this is what they're using in production. But then we have the SaaS, which is basically for the authors of the actual design system. And then we have the compiled CSS, and that's for people that don't really want to use any of these tools, but they just want just like a dump of all the CSS, and it's all compiled, so they can literally just plug it into the application and start using them. So this is a great quote from Mark. He had an article called "A Million Little Pieces: Functional CSS in React," and the great quote was basically saying like the best CSS is the best CSS you write is the CSS you don't write. And if you think about it, the less you write, the more scalable it is, but also the actual pieces where you focus on, like the less CSS you write, the more scalable your application and styles is going to be. So let's get into advanced stuff. So basically, there's this idea of a compound component, and this is more for React, but I'm thinking that you could use it for any JavaScript framework. And the compound component is basically an advanced React pattern where you have a collection of components that share state. So when I say state, you could think about it as like it shares information between information between each other. So one example of a compound component is something within HTML where we have a kind of like a select element, and then we have options. So basically, the select knows like which of these options are selected at the current state. You could do the same thing with compound components within React. So you have the dropdown, you have the dropdown element, dropdown item. And the good thing about it is that this makes it where the component's flexible. So there might be a case where you want to add like an icon or maybe want to do something different. This makes it easier. And before I was thinking about this, I was thinking about using render props, but this is also good for engineers because I actually asked the engineer like, would this be the best way to do it? And I think that's the best way you want to do is kind of like making sure that you ask your user like how you want to use this actual component itself. So this is actually an example of it. And Yuna actually had a great article about like why design systems fail. And she said, despite how much control the other engineers have on the process, they need to feel like they have input and feel heard. And I think this is super important, especially if you want people to kind of use it, but also be able to contribute, even if they're not like building an actual component. You want to get their ideas and making sure that they're heard, but also they might be a good idea. They might be a good idea, and also you want to be able to figure out how you can kind of put it into the actual process itself. So last, we are going to talk about the product. I feel like there's like 3 byproducts of like focusing on like a design system that's tailored to the engineer experience, but there's 2 that's super important. So Brad Falls actually has this article called "The Workshop and Storefront." And if you really think about it, the workshop is where you actually build the actual components itself, and the storefront is where you kind of display the actual components. So if you look at it, if you're thinking about it more on like in a repo level and how like things are going to be structured, you have in a way where you have the package and you have the docs folder. You go a little deeper. So this is actually a MDX file. And the great thing about this is that it allows you to use React components within the documentation. So right now you see I'm just importing the actual component, kind of have a content around the actual what the component is. I have this kind of the variance over here, and then I have a props table. And what tool I'm using is basically so if you take a look at this actually. So basically I have like a command basically running where, let's say I just want to grab all the MDX files from each of the components and put them into the docs folder. You could write like a simple command script and that will allow you to do it. You also could use gulp or any other like dev tool, but choose which one that's like gonna work for you. And what I use currently is DocZ. It's super new. I think it's like a couple of months old, but the idea is that it's like super easy to kind of create like a design system documentation site because everything's like pre-baked and built in. So if you look at the example again I kind of gave before, it comes built in with like all this stuff where we have like a playground. You kind of have access to the JSX, but also the HTML itself. And then you have this kind of like table of like basically a props table. And the good thing about this is that you don't really have to update this at all. It's literally like once you update the actual component and build the actual documentation site, you get this all for free. And I feel like this basically leads to another thing where I'm very passionate about, which is front-end prototyping. There's many ways to do it. You could do it in a way where you're kind of homegrown, where you're using either Gatsby.js or Middleman or Jekyll, or you could do it like a simple, cheap way, which is kind of with CodePen. So if people want to be able to kind of prototype their ideas real quick, they can use like this template. But the one thing I want to communicate that at the end of the day, we want to try to be able to kind of design the actual experience, like the real experience, not just like some picture of the actual UI, but actual like the interactions and whatnot. You want to be able to do it where you have one master deliverable. So rather than throwing a lot of mock-ups and whatnot to your engineers, you kind of give them this kind of one deliverable that has everything they need. And this is kind of like a process that I was using when I was working on a design team where it was like 30 designers, and we all were kind of contributing to this like one master repo. So what ends up happening is like they kind of fork off of the master, and then they kind of do all their work, and then they put it back into the actual master itself. And the whole idea about this is like you can make it in a way where your prototype, especially if you have workflow like user flows that kind of touch many different parts of the application, that they actually can kind of they could actually kind of use the actual same styles and structure from like a different section of that prototype and use it at their work. I work with a lot of data, so front-end prototyping allows for easy use of real data. So you want to be in a place where you could design around the actual data and not just use lorem ipsum or fake data itself. I've written like an article on this, so if you want to learn more about it, check out the Hard Internet. I'm gonna tweet this out later on. But one thing I want to communicate is that you want to move away from the whole idea of pixel perfection. Because I feel like if we have a great design system that has everything we need, our designers don't really need to actually make these mock-ups. We could just create these like wireframes and basically hand it off to the developers, or maybe there could be some sort of collaboration. But the whole idea is that the designers are not pushing pixels no more. They're really focusing on creating the best experience possible with user flows and maybe understanding the actual needs and wants of the user. So I'm going to leave with 3 things. So you first want to understand the problems and goals of the people, which is important, but also create a process that empowers the people itself. Because you want to do it in a way where it's like not frictionless, but you want to do it in a way where it's frictionless, but also people know like how to get from point A to point B. And then last, you want to have a product that brings value, not only to the primary users, but also the secondary and others. That's pretty much it. Thank you.
Thank you, Adekunle. So in your talk, you started early on and you said, but then it's up to the engineers to execute. You said they're in charge, they're responsible. And so you put the responsibility on them. And then later you had a slide that talked about make it everybody's responsibility. How do you create that transition to help everybody understand and empower them to do so, to engage with it and feel like they're responsible or even accountable for its success?
I think the first thing you want to do is that you want to basically have them in the room, and basically it's like a group effort. So even like if you're crafting a design system, you just don't want to be just designers or engineers, or you want to basically have it in a way where you have everyone's input is heard. But totally understand that if you kind of focus on the engineer or developer experience, that at the end of the day, you're going to have consistent UI, but also it's going to be less likely where, you don't want to like keep on designing a button, because I feel like that happens often, where it's like we're doing the same things over and over again. And I feel like if you're doing it in a way where it's like a collaborative effort, even for me, like I do a lot of pair programming with the engineers. I do a lot of design studios with like other designers and QA and whatever like that. Because my whole idea is that you want to make sure that everyone's idea is heard, but also making a way where if you kind of see or feel a trend, that you could do in a way where you solve that problem first and then move on from there.
I really appreciate in your research that you had the survey, that you had a survey instrument, but also not just that it had a lot of quantitative responses. Often when I do surveys, that last big box is a treasure trove of qualitative themes. Can you talk a little bit about any qualitative themes that emerged from your research like that and how it might have changed the direction or perception of how you worked with the system?
Yeah, I think one thing, which was like, it was interesting, but I was kind of shocked where we had this design system one time, but it was like, it depended on like actual framework. So a couple of the engineer managers was like, yeah, I just want like a bootstrap version of it. And people were like, kind of like they were like, what? Like, why do they want a bootstrap? But from them, bootstrap was a big, like major point, because it made it super easy to kind of use like user styles. And that's why I kind of like try to communicate like it has to be frictionless as possible for the user. So I want to be able to kind of take it and use it, and basically within within an hour. And our current framework, the one I was working on, it probably took you like a half a day or a day to kind of make put it into your application. So that was one thing that was kind of fascinating. But I think another thing was like a lot of engineers are like, oh yeah, I don't want to write CSS. And this is where I thought like if you're a front engineer, you love writing CSS, but that's not the case.
So you talked about frictionless a lot. That's a word that you used, and you just referred a bit to onboarding. As a designer, as an engineer, what kind of tips could you offer to say, if you look at your onboarding process and you want to optimize down from a day, because a day sounds like really intimidating, that sounds really long. What are the key things that you would do to optimize that onboarding process to be frictionless?
Oh, it goes back to the thing I was talking about, like around documentation. And that's the thing. I was like, to this day, I don't even like writing documentation, but I feel like it's super important, because you can't have someone like really telling you the ins and outs of it. But also, you want to be in a place where people can understand them. Not only the designers, but engineers, and not only the engineers, but also like everyone else. Because you want to be in a way where it kind of empowers the people. And I feel like if you have clear and concise documentation, it makes everyone's lives easier.
So what would be good documentation for onboarding, and how do you get over that writer's block? You said like people don't like to write documentation. How do you look at that blank canvas of how to provide instructions and choose the right moments to make them feel successful?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there was one project I was working on where we were building out a data visualization design system. And with like data viz, it was like, it's not as simple as like creating like a button, like what a button does, whatever like that. We actually had to like really get into details about like when should I use a bar chart over a line chart and whatever like that. And one of the things we had the pleasure of having like a content strategist on the team. So she was giving us tips, and basically we had like a framework. So basically for each of the components, it follows a specific framework. So it made it easier for us to write documentation. But also she did it in a way where she wasn't writing the documentation. She just kind of gave us the framework. We will kind of take the first stab at it, and then she would give us like some tips and tricks in with that. And I feel like that was super helpful, because it made it in a way where it was like everyone was kind of slowly understanding like how to write effective documentation that it's like clear and concise, basically.
All hail the content strategists who made a system for the system makers. So the next thing that comes to mind is, I really appreciate that you had such structure in your, I think it was a GitHub Kanban-like view of all the different tasks and who they're assigned to, and in particular, even the bracketed text that help you understand this task is for that topic. How do you get other people to conform to or embrace the conventions around how you track the work and model the work?
I mean, it's still kind of hard because I follow that and I tell people like, you don't have to follow if you don't want to, but it's gonna make your life easier. Because like even before I was doing that method, I was kind of just like I didn't really care. But I think it's super important because people start seeing the benefits of like having some sort of system and framework for anything. Like they don't have to follow it, but it's there if they need it. And I tell people all the time, it's like if you're like super busy and you have like 5 hours to kind of work on a component, like we have everything you need. So like there's a framework, and you still like sooner or later, like what's gonna happen is like it's not, they don't have to think about it no more. So it's like, all right, I know how to do this and I know how to do that. But also, if you look at like the work and whatever like that, it's all readable. And I think that's super important. Like they're not gonna really there's gonna be some pushback in the beginning, but I think the more people are exposed to it, the easier it gets, and then they start kind of conforming.
That's great. And so you had a moment in your talk where you said design systems don't exist until they're in code. I think a lot of people had a very strong visual reaction to that, to the positive, and I suspect there were other people that were like, what? I got sketch files. I chose color. And so help me understand a little bit more about the definitiveness of that statement.
Yeah, so this came from when I was like doing a lot of mock-ups where, I mean, I used to do this back in the day, but like I was like, oh, like I know sometimes we have a grid system and then we're like, oh, let's add like a extra 2 pixels of like padding, or let's use a different color. And what ends up happening was like all the stuff we created is like all snowflakes. So I think the idea of using it in code, but also building a way where you don't have to write new UI for any component. Because one of the things of what I do is like I use functional CSS. So it's kind of similar to like tachyons, where you have like all these like class names and whatever like that kind of build new UI. So the whole idea is like you don't really have to like write any new code to kind of like build, like actually like craft the actual UI of it. And what I found out is that the more constraints you give to people, the less likely they're going to follow the more likely they're going to follow the design system. And I think, like I said, I feel like it's not really real until it's in code, because we could like plan, the best design system ever, but unless it's like in code and people actually using it, it's not really real. It's kind of like with anything else. Like I could kind of draw you a car, but it's not really real until you build it out. So
to close, you used a phrase, small steps, great distances. And so as a collaborator working amid the design system you're creating, how could you help me understand, will we ever get there? Will we ever be done? And what is out in that great distance? Where are we trying to go?
Well, I'm going to say like a design system is never done. So, because I always say it's like, oh yeah, it's about to be like complete, finished, but there's always going to be some sort of improvement on it, and you kind of have to kind of take in a stride where it's like if you want to work out, like you gain muscles, but you have to keep on working on it, because you're trying to improve and keep on improving, and you have to communicate that to everybody, because I feel like in some cases people are like, all right, the system's done, but then a year later it gets outdated and you have to like work on it again. So if you keep on working on it, the more likely it's going to be successful, but also the less likely that it's gonna be a place where you could be really focusing on things that matter, and you're just doing small steps, and then you look back like a year and you're like, oh wow, we started here and then we end up here. And I think that's the thing I'm trying to communicate, because I feel like people feel like this is like one shot, like once it's done, like you don't have to worry about it anymore, but that's not the case.
Well, thanks for taking us on a walk.
Yeah, no
Everybody, thank you, Adekunle.